Hello, hello. Welcome back. I hope you are doing well. I have a little treat for you today. I'm being joined by somebody who genuinely I feel I'm a better human for knowing. This is Dr. Gena Cox. She's CEO of Feels Human LLC. She's a trained organizational psychologist who's now an executive coach, and she focuses on helping leaders optimize their impact and influence, make career pivots, and build inclusive organizations. This woman really touched my soul. And I think I have left this conversation feeling like I can make a bigger change on the world purely because I'm more confident in the way I am going to approach my conversations around leadership. And as you'll hear, the word respect. Gena has given a TED Talk on yes and careers. The topic is the title. And she really encourages everyone she works with to build a purposeful career. And again, speaking to my soul here. But the conversation we had today really focused on helping leaders see that inclusion tops diversity, but it all starts powered by respect. That respect is at the center of what we need to be doing. She is about the impact on human culture, how effective leaders put respect first and foremost, and thinks about the stuff that we need to be doing instead of just talking about the stuff that we would like to be doing. She knows that many of us are intimidated by the conversation around inclusion. Like, how do we do this? It's hard, it's complicated. What if I do it wrong? And she has such a heart-centered approach to doing this. I could literally have talked to this lady all day, and I'm sure she's going to be back on the show. But without further ado, let's get Gena Cox onto the show. Welcome to the show, Gena. It's really great to have you here.
And Tony, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I am so looking forward to digging into this conversation. I wish I had been hitting record for some of the conversation we've just been having before, as we were going to, chat through what we're going to discuss today on this show. We've got so much to get through, but I would love for you to start off with telling me and the audience a little bit about your career journey, some highlights and the lowlights. I often think the lowlights are where the most interesting stories come from, and how you came today to work in the field of inclusion, organizational psychology, and why you're so passionate about this topic.
Oh, wow. I think for as long as I could remember, ever since I was a child, I've always been fascinated by humans. Somehow, I'm that person in the airport who could sort of sit there and just watch people do the things they do. I've always been that way. So I've always been interested in psychology. But thought that I was going to be a journalist. I mean, that was my ambition, was to be a journalist. I wanted to be an intrepid journalist that wore, a black T-shirt with a vest over it with lots of pockets and went around the world. I don't know. I had this fantasy idea, and I still kind of cling to this notion. But you probably notice that those two careers do have a little bit in common. The commonality is all about sort of asking questions and learning things and putting patterns together so that you can help other people understand something that they might not otherwise understand. But I studied organizational psychology because in addition to this interest that I had in humans, I have an interest in business. And somewhere I figured out a long time ago that it is in the workplace where humans are sort of our best and our worst, because it's not that long really since the agricultural, since we were all working on farms, and then there was an industrial revolution that changed everything. That change is relatively recent in humankind. And so we are still learning how to be humans together at work. But once I made that decision to choose the academic path, I've had the luxury of working in companies for decades. And I've worked in some of the largest companies in the world, actually, because I've worked on, in large global organizations. And I've worked as an external consultant to leaders across those global organizations. And I've worked as an internal consultant, sometimes as an employee of a single company. At this point in my career, I work primarily, I'm an entrepreneur, and I work primarily as an executive coach and advisor to business leaders, helping them really enhance their impact and their influence in the organizations that they lead, and also helping them build inclusive organizations. But you asked about career journey, and it's been quite a journey. I think that there were times when as I said before, I worked internally and love everything about corporate life. It's sort of the environment that is my natural habitat. But then there would come a point where I would say enough of this, because, when you work in one company, you have that sense that this is the world, and yet that this is just a speck in the world. And so I would leave and I would do something different so that I could get a broader perspective. But the highlight of my professional career, I think, has always been something to do with learning. And the place where I learned the most was when I worked at IBM in a group that was called Smarter Workforce. And what we were doing was we were applying technologies to help organizations make better employee selection decisions, to help managers make better leadership decisions, and so on. And we were using AI, by the way, even though it sounds as if AI is in the front of everything that people talk about these days, and it seems very new. You're not surprised to know that IBM and many other tech companies have been working in this space for a long time. But anyway, so the highlight of my entire career has been the opportunities that I've had to learn a lot about human behavior, about leaders, about leadership, and just about organizational life. The lowlight of my career, or the lowlights, I would say, have always had to do with this notion that because I'm an immigrant, at least in the United States context, there have been times when I have sort of watched myself. I felt like I was looking down on myself as I was doing whatever I was doing in the environment where I operated. And I had this sense of before and after. My previous life, where I had a particular kind of experience, I was a high achiever, an A student, and everyone said, "Oh, wow, you're fantastic." Coming to the United States, I got a different kind of reaction in general. I began to notice that people often make assumptions about you just because of how you look. I guess I didn't realize that to such an extent until I came to the United States. But that idea is something that throughout my professional career, I'm always observing it, not talking about it, but observing it, because it's just a fascinating thing. And so over the years, the lowlights have often had to do with those times when I have personally felt excluded, or where I have just observed other people around me having that experience and wondering, why does it have to be so hard?
That is so powerful. It's heartbreaking, but I think it's also really eye-opening, because it touches on this subject of inclusion so profoundly, because your lowlights in your life, not just your career, but your life from the sound of it, are where you felt personally excluded. And, I always think of our lowlights as there's the pieces of the puzzle that can either drag us down or be the fire that pushes us up. And, a lot of the work that you and I do as coaches is about redirecting the energy from pulling us down to pushing us up. Not everybody has that luxury, right?
Absolutely
And
right.
you've just described something extremely strong, which I think many people on some level will relate to. I suspect your experience is more intense, perhaps, than much of my audience. I would love for you to describe, if you felt willing to do so, some of your experience of being an immigrant, and in particular being a Black immigrant, because I think especially for the white women in the audience, myself included, although we want to understand, we've never been in your shoes. And so your lowlights are probably more intense than we have ever personally experienced. So I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I don't know if I feel these things any more intensely than any other person, except for the fact that I am a psychologist, journalist at heart, and observing is the thing that I do. And for that reason, may observe more than other people. So that's the only distinction I can really call, because I believe that the kinds of things that we're talking about when we talk about inclusion, I think we all know what inclusion feels like. We also know what exclusion feels like. We all know this. It's just that some people may have more of the exclusionary type of experiences just by virtue of societal norms and patterns that sometimes feel like we don't even notice those patterns. But what I would say from an immigrant's perspective is that And this is true for any immigrant, I'm sure, regardless of where they come from and regardless of the country where they have immigrated to, is that you have this period of time where you're looking in the mirror and you're seeing the same person, but now you have to sort of recalibrate yourself because the world in which you're functioning is very different than the one that you came from. And so if we're talking about the work context and if we're talking about experiences where now you might have characteristics that differ from the majority group where you go in the place that you've gone to, it's quite an abrupt experience. But from a behavior perspective, meaning the things that people would be most useful for the people who are listening to this conversation, I would say that the biggest challenge when you're an immigrant is that people make a lot of assumptions about you that tend to be assumptions of inferiority. And I think that's probably true for any immigrant, right? Because what we all want is for everybody to be like us. I like to use the word comfort because I think we're all seeking comfort in the world. We just want it to be easy. And so when things grate against us, when things feel a little unfamiliar, I think that kind of reduces our comfort. So I think it's a very natural reaction. But people would say things. One of the weirdest things that someone ever said to me that I'll never forget, but I thought was very telling, was when I was in graduate school. One day I was in the hallway and I was wearing a black t-shirt with gold embroidery. I remember this t-shirt so vividly because it said Barbados. And why I remember it was I remember picking this t-shirt out. This was in a time when most t-shirts from the Caribbean were like a white background or a pink background or some sort of a soft blue background with a palm tree and a sun, and a sunset or something. And I wanted something different. And so I remember buying this t-shirt because it was different. And a lady, another graduate student that I did not know, I had seen her, but I didn't really know her, walked by as I was talking to my friends and said, you really shouldn't wear a shirt from a place that you've never been to. It was the weirdest thing. Why did she say that, right? And I remember my friends were like, and they went to correct her. And I said, why did she say that? What made her say that? And I recognize, it's an example of what I'm trying to explain it in a very quick story. It was, she have made so many assumptions about me, not having known me. And it just kind of quickly came out. She probably has no idea why she said that herself. So I think the immigrant experience is often about the emphasis on the difference and that the difference couldn't possibly be a good difference. Another aspect of the immigrant experience is for sure that, our the education system that you come out of could be very, very different. And so wherever you go, the idea of what sort of are the standard ways of doing things could just be so very different that even as you're just doing whatever it is that you're doing, you find that the people around you do not recognize how much of an adjustment you're having to make in order to do the thing that you're doing. But I would say that the immigrant experience for someone like me was actually quite easy. When I think about the challenges of the immigrant experience in the workplace, I'm not often thinking about myself. And why do I say that? I say that because I came here, I studied for a PhD. Because I was born in England and I had this particular accent, my accent was not objectionable. People didn't criticize this accent. In fact, people were fascinated by the way that I spoke. But I don't think that's the experience of a person who speaks a different language or the person who comes from a certain part of the world where the perceptions are so strong about who those people are and whether they're good or bad and all those kinds of things. And so when I think about the immigrant experience, if I advise leaders anything, it is that you should be aware that immigrants will likely have different experiences in the workplace. And so you've got to sort of tune into that so that you can ask about those experiences, acknowledge those experiences, and support them just as you support any other kind of inclusion.
There's so much in this that I want to chat about. We go down a massive rabbit hole here straight away. It actually talking about those immigrant experiences. I mean, I'm in an incredibly lucky position to have a team that's across 6 countries. And I would say a couple of those women are immigrants in their countries, but just the variety of experience we've got. You mentioned different education systems. To me, that is one of the most extraordinary things about my company is all those experiences mean that we never look at things the same way.
Yeah.
And we answer questions in a myriad of different ways. And I'm constantly challenged in the most positive way to think about things differently. And I love it. I'm also privileged to work with extraordinary women in my day job, like, the coaching I do. And I would say about 25%, a quarter to a third, varies, of those women are immigrants. And many of them, we work globally, but most of my audience is North America.
Uh-huh.
And many of them are immigrants in the US. And these women, I tell you something, I mean, it's a self-selecting audience, I will tell you that, because of course they're coming to work with a coach. They are so driven.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've never been an immigrant. I've been born and brought up in the UK. I very nearly moved to the US a few years ago, and then life happened. My husband and I have now settled in Scotland, and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. But that's the closest I've ever come. But I think to actually take that step of living and working in a different country, especially when it's a foreign language, I mean, that is a level of something I don't think I've personally got in me. I might, my audience might be like, "Oh, Tony, you're letting us down here," but we backed out of that, my husband and I. There were lots and lots of reasons for doing so, but we didn't actually follow through in the end ever. And so I find it fascinating that you certainly see, and I do see, there's this immediate kind of looking at people with a level of inferiority because they don't look and sound like us, when actually some of them are the most driven people you'll ever meet. Mm-hmm. What would you say in response to all that?
Well, first of all, I know that's a very human reaction. It's a human reaction, a normal human reaction on both sides. It's normal to be like, to notice the differences and to find the differences challenging. It would be easier if we were all the same, perhaps. That's how our brain seems to process that. I also think it's challenging on the side of the immigrant who is just trying to do the best that they can to be successful in whatever particular situation they're in. So I think we have to just sort of be aware of the issue and give each other grace on the issue, about the issue. We talked a little earlier before about this idea of inclusion. And inclusion, when I use the word inclusion, I'm just talking about the day-to-day experience of any person or any human in the workplace. It's not about a person of a certain race or a person with a certain kind of characteristics. However, we know just the facts that there is great variability in the experiences that people have as a function of their race and ethnicity and those kinds of differences. But I believe that the issue that we often miss is that this is not something that requires a complicated solution. The solution to bridging all these gaps that we're talking about is for each of us to sort of hold in our hearts and in our minds the belief that, all humans are equal. Let's just start there. All humans are pretty much the same. We're very, very similar underneath the outer layer of skin, according to all the scientists who do this kind of work. However, what we really all want is to be seen, heard, and valued. Being seen, heard, and valued is actually the definition of respect. And respect is the thing that I think that if we focused on that idea, an idea that is as old as time and one that we've been hearing from our parents forever, but if we focus on it and we focus on it in a specific way, I think we can bridge all of these kinds of divides. So I just would recommend that people focus on putting respect first, and that will make a big difference.
Yeah, I love that. And I know, we were chatting before and you said the word respect and explained how you used it, and it's about that resonating with all employees and everyone benefits. And I was like, yes. This is, I think, sometimes where the word inclusion doesn't quite serve us, in that it's not sufficient. It gets part way there, but that feeling of respect and being seen, heard, and valued, as you said, is spot on. Let's rewind a little bit and talk about why businesses. I feel like this is a conversation that maybe has been done to death, and yet I'm still hearing businesses not working on this stuff, or they have a budget for DEIB, but it's not moving the needle. Obviously, this is at the heart of what you do.
Yeah.
Why should businesses work on this stuff in 2023 when the world around us is shifting so quickly? Why now?
Well, they should work on it at any time. But the main reason is not because of some ethical or moral obligation. I mean, you could have that, but I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason that businesses should work on this issue is that quite simply they won't be competitive if they don't. I mean, they could be competitive in the short run, and maybe, you can't prove a negative. So someone might say, well, we don't have any diversity now. We're not all that inclusive, and we still seem to be successful. And that may be true, but that is not going to be a sustainable pattern into the future for a variety of reasons. One of which is that the next generation that's taken over the world is not going to tolerate that in the first place. They won't come to work for you. They won't stay if they come, and they will have very loud voices in the public square where they demand something better for everyone.
Let me just interrupt you for a second, if you don't mind. While we're having a great time with this discussion, I'm certainly having a blast. I just want to ask a favor of you. If you are finding this conversation inspiring, please do me one favor. Please share this with somebody you think needs to hear this show. If you have the bandwidth for a second favor, please hit like and subscribe in your favorite platform, whether that's on YouTube or on your favorite podcast player. The more likes and subscribes we get, the easier it is for us to reach more people and hopefully to change the world. Thank you so much.
Another reason, of course, is that as the world is changing demographically, politically, socially, there's every reason to think that your particular product or service won't be able to satisfy the people who to whom you're trying to sell that product or service if you do not understand them and do not understand their concerns and their preferences. I'm fascinated with this with regard to the financial services industry. An industry that gets a chunk of money and makes a chunk of money from that chunk of money. And forever, this is an industry that has really underserved people from people of color, for example, and this is worldwide. People of color worldwide have been underserved with financial services. What that really means is not just that people of color couldn't get a mortgage or couldn't get a bank account or couldn't get basic services that other people could get. But what it also really meant is that financial services was missing a big opportunity to make money.
I know, right?
And so I did see how the conversation changed after 2020, where, oh, you mean there's this whole bunch of people who have money that we haven't scooped up into our coffers? And why wouldn't we do that? Let's go get it. And the reason that wasn't happening was because of the perception, an exclusionary perception, that group of people wouldn't have assets that would be worth attention, that they didn't need services, that you couldn't provide those services in certain locations. That is an example, I think, of the consequence to one segment of our economy when you don't really think about the fact that all of the humans in the place where you're doing business could be your potential client, and then you design your products to satisfy that. So that's another reason.
The irony of this, the very soul-destroying irony, I suppose, is how many times we've been through this as the human race. Several hundred years ago, we didn't, anybody who was working class, working in agriculture, anything like this, they weren't served. Like the poor people, they didn't have a vote, they weren't served, right? That's right. Suffragettes movement happened because women weren't allowed to spend money. We didn't have a vote. We weren't served.
That's right.
And, the 60s and 70s, so important for women because suddenly companies started realizing women spend all the money. So actually we need to market to them. I remember a car when I was growing up and it was branded as the car for women because they put a mirror in the driver's side for us to do our makeup. And I just found that was their attempt at serving women. You're like, what on earth? And then we're going through it again with ethnic minorities. And it's like, really, we're still here? How many other things are we not seeing? And every time we resist, that's the other thing, this resistance that's happening politically in society but we can't do this because, and it is just resistance. There's all these excuses. In my opinion, it's just resistance because they do not like what's coming because it's scary. And we've been through this so many times. It's like, how many more times do we have to go through this as a species?
Yeah. I mean, the fundamental thing is that we've got truly, I believe, if we could just see every other person as our equal and say, that's just another human. I might have more money or I might have a bigger house or whatever, a fancier title. but that person and I are very much identical in terms of what we really want. And so, yeah, we keep noticing. It's
Mm,
not that these are new behaviors, because these patterns have just existed forever and we haven't noticed them, but we're sort of uncovering layer upon layer where we see that there's just so much more opportunity for us to think this way, to have an ethos of equity, an ethos of
mm.
respect that will benefit all of us. And I think the thing that will really make the difference, and the reason that I'm so passionate about this issue, is I don't think our children want this. I think our children want or need something different.
That just speaks to my soul. That so speaks to my soul. Okay, we should change gear because I mean I feel like I've gone somewhere with you that I am very appreciative of, but I know that my audience also loves to hear about all the things to do with leadership. And with you here, I really want to let's take advantage of you. I would love for you to share what is it that you do when you go into a workplace as an executive coach with that organizational psychology hat on, and you are there to shift things and make it more respectful, more inclusive. What would you say are your top priorities for doing when you go into such a place?
Yeah, I mean, my top priority kind of depends on who I'm working with. But let's say I started to work in an organization with the C-suite, which is the ideal scenario for me, because I believe that the kinds of changes and experiences that we're talking about are ever only going to happen and can only be sustained when they're driven from the top of an organization. So when I get to work with the C-suite, that really delights me. And I'm not talking to them about esoteric ideas. I'm not talking to them about their emotions. And I'm not talking to them about ideas that, sort of, this is how you're going to make the world better. Although ultimately those are outcomes I desire. I'm really talking to them about very specific actions that they can take. Because executives in particular, that's the only language that they speak. And this is actually one of the ways that I think about what I'm trying to accomplish. My goal would be for every organization to have respect as one of its core values. And if you do some quick research, let's say even about the Fortune 500 or just some cross section of large companies, you'll find that many companies do have respect as one of their corporate values, although maybe not as many, fewer than 40% consistently. So the idea of having respect as a corporate value isn't something that leaders find shocking. But what I try to encourage them to do is to really think carefully about, well, how would you define respect? What does that really mean? And I share with them that from my perspective, from my work, respect has three components in terms of what it is that the recipient desires. And respect is always a two-way street. But employees and humans want to be seen. They want to believe that just being present in a space, having a certain humanity, just being human really in a space is something that another human would acknowledge, and that they would feel like in this space, we are doing this dance together that humans do. We're just connecting to get the work done or whatever with no friction. We're just human. But people also want to be heard. They want to be able to have space for their ideas. They want their ideas to be used. They want to get credit for their ideas. They want to feel like their contribution to an organization through their ideas and their work are sort of acknowledged so that they can feel important in a way, right? That this is something that they're doing for this good. And they want to feel valued. And valued can come in the form, of course, of compensation and direct rewards and that sort of thing. But more importantly, people want to feel recognized. So being valued has two components, being rewarded and being recognized. And this is truly the piece about having the opportunity to have access to the goodies of a business. It's not just getting a gold star, it's getting a promotion. It's getting a job that gives me the visibility where I'm close to the people who generate the revenue for the business, or I'm close to the clients because you don't hide me in the back room or in the basement. And so I try to let my clients think about respect in that way, consider having this as one of their corporate values, thinking about what it would feel like if they had an organization in which respect was at the core of everything that they did, and at the experience and at the core of the experiences of their employees and their clients and customers. When I'm dealing with, I don't always get to work with the senior team. So with any leader and any manager or any person actually in an organization, I'm really having a very similar conversation, except that what I'm saying is, here are the things that you can do today to help make a more respectful environment. And why do I focus on respect? I don't think I told you why I focus so much on respect, Tony, but let me tell you this. I focus on respect as the key outcome when I was doing some research for my book, and I discovered that in response to the question, what is it that you would want your leaders to know about your experience in their organizations regarding inclusion? When we content analyzed the responses to those questions, what I discovered was that the responses were very similar, and that most employees, regardless of who they were, what they looked like, would say these were the things that they wanted. Oh, so when we put them into the buckets, the seen, heard, and valued, and then we sort of stepped back from it, we could see that what employees were saying is, we want a certain kind of feeling when we do this work. If you look at data from Pew Research, for example, what you would see is that about 70 to 75% of employees feel respected at work every day, meaning about a quarter of employees do not feel respected at work. And yet this is such a fundamental need. And so I was seeing that in my data. And then I did some more research, and I discovered that one of the distinguishing characteristics between majority group employees and underrepresented group employees is that majority group employees value being liked. And they think that showing people or expressing something that shows you that I like you would be accepted as a form of respect. But when you talk to people from underrepresented groups, that's not what they say. They say, no, I don't care as much about being liked. What I really care about is being respected. And that respect is in these three buckets that I told you about: feeling heard, seen, and valued. So what I noticed is that these two groups were going in opposite directions, because have you ever heard a situation where a manager would say, I did this thing and I don't know what I did, but for some reason, so-and-so thinks I disrespected them or told me that I'm disrespecting them, and I'm trying so hard. Well, there's a reason for that. And it's related to what I just said. So I focus on respect, and I say to managers, you have got to, during the pandemic, when WorkHuman did research to figure out what were the characteristics of the managers that employees said were the most engaging, the most likely to create an engaging work environment, as they had made this transition from face-to-face work to remote work. Consistently, what people said it was that the manager checked in with them. So managers checking in with employees is an extremely powerful behavior that employees ascribe a lot of positive characteristics to. They feel very good about it. And so checking in has to do with this idea that I feel good in your environment if I feel like you know something about me. Not just am I doing the job or am I performing, but you know more about me as a whole person. So managers have to be curious in order to get connected with their employees so employees can feel comfortable. And so that model is what I share. I say, don't make this complicated, just connect.
It's so beautiful and so spot on with what I see coming at this just from a great leadership lens. I mean, I do care deeply about inclusion, but I know I focus on elevating leadership in people first, perhaps naive of me. But it is when you create that human connection and you call out but they're not, I did this and I don't understand why it didn't work. Well, not everybody is like you. You've got a different experience to them. And just because it that's what you'd want doesn't mean that's what they need or want. But just to, check in there on that research you did, I'd be very curious. You said that in your research, you saw a different thing from the majority to the minority. Is that just US data or is it broader than that? I was wondering, when you've got majority, is that based on majority versus minority, or is it based on particular ethnicities?
So the research that I did was done in the United States. So that's the first thing. And I had first done interviews with executives, conversations with executives, asking them what did they need, what is it that they wanted to learn, or what support did they need in the inclusion arena. And what I had learned from those managers was that these executives felt underprepared to deal with the inclusion challenge. They also felt a little bit afraid of it. And they also felt that they didn't really understand what it is that those employees from underrepresented groups really desired so that they could then provide it and could feel like they were being effective. So then I did this follow-on survey in the United States with working Americans. And, it wasn't that was a survey where I understood that the issues that employees were talking about could be categorized as respect, as the key issue that they desired. And that was true regardless of what group they were in. The difference I saw was that for the underrepresented respondents to the survey, they had a lot more to say. They had a lot greater volume of responses, and they had more specific comments that they offered regarding this question. And so it was clear that this was something that was a need, something they were craving, I'd like to say, even more so than a majority group. Does this apply across the world? I do not know. But what does apply across the world is this notion that being liked and being respected are two completely different things. And that if if a leader focuses only on sort of making somebody feel that they like them, there's no guarantee that that person is going to feel respected, especially if they're from an underrepresented group.
Yeah, that is really, really fascinating. I would, and I assume this is all in your book. Is that correct? Like everything you're describing here?
Not everything I'm describing, because I'm actually preparing for my second book. Thank you for asking.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Which is all about respect. So I've been doing a deep dive into respect over the last, year and a half since the first book was done. And so some of this additional work is going to be in my second book, because, especially since my focus is on leadership, the path to trust, which is the essential thing for an organizational leader or any kind of leader to really have the impact they desire. The path to that comes through respect. Respect comes before trust, and that's documented in the psychological literature. So if you don't start with respect, you're never going to get to trust. And I want leaders to understand that. That's one of the things I'm working on in my second book.
Wow. Congratulations on that coming. And we will definitely, for listeners, we will make sure a link to Gena's book is in the show notes. And hopefully we'll get Gena back on when she launches her next book as well.
Thank you.
This work is so incredibly important. And I could talk about this all day. I love this stuff. I think it is the backbone of what makes tech. I mean, it's the backbone of what makes business better. And my mission to make the world of tech better for the human race. I believe that this is absolutely necessary, this work. So thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. What I would like to do, which I do every episode, is wrap up with some quick fire questions, kind of fun questions. Is that all right with you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, here we go. First question. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
I would say the worst piece of advice is sort of something my grandparents used to say that seemed like good advice back in the day, but doesn't seem that way anymore. And that is just sort of slow down and take your time and all of that kind of advice. I don't give young people that advice anymore. I say to them, if there's something that you crave and you have this burning desire to do it, I don't care how young you are, get started, do it. Don't wait for anything, because what exactly are you waiting for? Are you waiting for people to see that you have this thing or to tap you on the shoulder and say, go? No, you just have to go get it.
That's such a coaching moment, isn't it? Just go get it. I love that. Yeah. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I'm a big Maya Angelou fan. And she said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And so I go through life and I just let people be who they are. But I make a judgment at some point about whether this is a relationship about which, that I want as part of my life. And I do this with, of course, loved ones or, friends, I should say. And I do this with anybody that I meet. But I also do it with clients. And I just make these choices that it's not worth it to spend your time around people who are sort of sapping your energy or who are putting negative vibes out into the world. I only want to be around the ones that are trying to do good. And I follow that advice.
Beautiful. What is the last book you read and would you recommend it?
Oh my gosh. I tend to read multiple books at the same time, but the very last book that I read is one that is right here on my counter, on my desk rather. And I would highly recommend it. It's called The Mirrored Door. The Mirrored Door by Ellen Tafe. This is a book that you would find very interesting because what Ellen says is that, yes, there is a glass ceiling and that's very real. We can't necessarily do anything about it on a minute by minute basis. But what each of us really also has to contend with is the mirrored door that holds us back. You know, when there are things that we desire as women in our careers, we have a tendency to get really introspective and to hold ourselves back. And what she's saying is open the door and go for it. Similar idea.
No, I love that. I love that so much. At the end of the day, the thing we have complete control over is our own heads.
Yes.
And that is our most powerful tool for doing things like breaking through the glass ceiling.
That's
and
right.
hopefully shattering it for those coming along behind us. We just have to be tough cookies along the way. Okay, one more question for you. What's your favorite mindset tip?
You know, I don't know if you know the answer to that question. I haven't really pondered that question in that way before, but I would say that my operating principle, you know, the way that I think about things is that I really say, I want to change the world, but I can only change Gena. And so it goes back to this notion of having some idea about what you want and then doing a little step. You don't have to do dramatic things. And so I don't know if that answers your question or if that, you know, but that's the way I think about it.
I love that because it kind of, I think sometimes when we have, a lot of the women I work with, myself included, we're very ambitious. We're here to leave our mark. We're here to leave the world in a better place than we found it. And sometimes it can feel like, why do I bother when the world is this hot mess,
yes.
right? I have actually recently stopped watching the news because it is so painful. I'm just like, I'm doing all this stuff and then it's just getting worse. It's sometimes how I feel. But I love that centering of, well, I can change me. Yeah. And if I take a small step in the right direction, I might just make a difference. Baby steps every time, right?
Absolutely. And also just giving other people grace about that because other people are making their baby steps and you can't judge, you can't calibrate other people's experiences. You just focus on your own and then try to do that by putting the good vibes out into the world as you do what you do and staying away from the negative ones.
I love that. That is so beautiful. Oh my goodness me. This is incredible. I feel like honestly we could have chatted for hours here. There's so many things I think we just touched the surface on like 100 different things. Where can people find out more about you and what you do, connect with you? Read your book, all those things.
Yeah, if your listeners go to genacox.com, you can learn more about me, about my work, about the book. I've got a little freebie on the front page if you want to know more about respect in terms of the way that I talked about it on this show. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to interact with anyone who's listening to this show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gena. This has been absolute blast. Listeners, I hope you have some real takeaways from this. I hope you're going to go out there and think about a conclusion as more about a conversation around respect, if nothing else. And as always, I'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn. And as you said, she would too. So let us know if you've got any questions from today's episode, or if you'd like us to dive a little deeper into this topic. But listeners, until next time, as always, stay on your tech leadership game, follow your dreams, because the world really does need that uniqueness that you bring as a leading woman in tech.